The playoffs start today. We made it. The postseason's finally here, even though the Rangers aren't in it this year. We've got a few things that Rangers fans should be looking out for this postseason, while the Rangers are unfortunately on their couches. We'll talk about all that and more on this episode of Locked On Rangers. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Rangers, your daily Texas Rangers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are locked onto the World Series champion Texas Rangers. I'm PrizePicks, a cripplingly addicted Texas Rangers fan, covering this team for 11 seasons, including all 6 as the founder and host of this podcast. Thank you all so much for making Locked On Rangers your first listen every single day. If you're not already, you can follow me on Twitter at PrizePicks. You can follow the show at Locked On Rangers. Hit subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform and on YouTube, where the best way you can help grow the show is to comment nearly any single thing below. Now, before we get into a playoff preview, which former Rangers are on playoff rosters and who I'm rooting for and picking in these different playoff series, this episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB to win $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks. Run your game. Now, I wanted to start with rooting interest with former Rangers, because that's usually where our hearts go out to, is former Ranger greats, players who, either didn't work out here or did work out here and now ended up on some other roster, but still hold special places in our heart. And I made sure to go through and look at every single former Ranger player that has played for these teams. Now, how many of them are actually on the current roster or just made a brief appearance? Well, probably less than half, but still, I feel like former Rangers is a great place to start while looking at this postseason picture. Why don't we just go through the seeds right now? Earning the byes in the AL, the number 1 seeded New York Yankees, of course. The number 2 seed that totally we all saw coming, the Cleveland Guardians, who are winners of the AL Central, a much more competitive division. The worst division winner in the American League, Houston Astros. And then the wild cards are as follow: the Baltimore Orioles, John Smoltz's favorite team, as the number 1 wild card. Number 2 wild card, the Kansas City Royals. And the number 3 wild card upstart out of nowhere, Detroit Tigers, jumping in there in the final weekend after being sellers at the deadline, just absolutely going on a heater for what will be a very contentious matchup, I think. Former Astros manager A.J. Hinch heading into Houston for that series. We got the Kansas City Royals and the Baltimore Orioles on the other side. And just decided about 20 minutes, not even 20 minutes, about 10 minutes before I started recording this episode over on the NL side, the number 1 seed Dodgers, number 2 seeded Phillies, and in one side of the bracket on the wild card, we have the San Diego Padres versus the Atlanta Braves after winning the second game of the wackiest, weirdest doubleheader on the day after the season ends, the day before the postseason starts, because, of course, why not? And those poor Diamondbacks not making it to the postseason, having to watch that doubleheader and then just go home. Incredibly frustrating for them, I'm sure, the reigning NL champions. And then on the other side, we have the 3-seeded Milwaukee Brewers versus the 6-seeded New York Metropolitans. Now, let's start by going with the one team that has nobody that has ever played for the Rangers on them this year, the Dodgers. Nobody. Absolutely nobody. That's it. Going down with the Phillies. They've had several former Rangers, though I don't believe any of them will make it to the postseason roster, including former Ranger greats such as David Dahl, Colby Allard, Tyler Phillips, who actually did pretty well for them in a few stints this year, but really kind of fell apart in the back half of his season, is not going to be a part of their postseason roster, I am pretty darn sure. And former Ranger great, former first-round pick in the 2014 MLB draft, Luis Ortiz, who appeared in, I believe, 1 game for the Phillies this year. The Brewers are just about as obscure in terms of the amount of former Rangers on their roster. Former Ranger terrible. Not former Ranger great. Not even the sarcastic title. Dallas Keuchel pitched in 5 games for the Brewers this year, somehow against all odds. Absolutely no idea how he pitched in 5 games for a team that won their division by a pretty hefty margin. On the Padres, for me, this is the most beloved Rangers division, or former Ranger division on there. Jurickson Profar, Yu Darvish, Martin Perez traded for at the deadline, and if you're counting front office personnel, former Rangers assistant GM AJ Preller has been running the show there for quite some time. Look at the Mets' former Ranger prospect Luis Angel Acuna, the centerpiece in the Max Scherzer trade, Max Scherzer plus $35 million trade. Former Ranger great Jake Diekman, former Rangers draft pick, never made it to the show with the Rangers, but Reed Garrett's been an integral part of their bullpen in New York. We would be very surprised if he does not make their playoff roster. And former Ranger Adrian Hauser. On the Braves, you have the big 3 that have been there for quite some time: Eli White, Jesse Chavez, and Luke Jackson. And just for kicks, the D-backs who didn't make it, all they had was Jordan Montgomery. And then we look at the Yankees. Jose Trevino is going to be a part of that roster. They also have former Ranger great Dennis Santana. If you're rooting for family interests, Jack's cousin Mark Leiter Jr. is on the Yankees. The Guardians have one absolutely beloved former Ranger. Austin Hedges is a member of the Cleveland Guardians. Getting those vibes back here for next year. Maybe that's paramount to turning things around in 2025. They also have former Ranger Emmanuel Clase, the best closer in baseball this season. Absolutely phenomenal year. He is going to be dynamite. They also had former Ranger farmhand Anthony Gose, a guy who was an 80 grade runner with a big arm and turned into a pitcher, and he pitched for a couple games this year. They also have Spencer Howard, pitched a couple games for them this year. Although the only ones who are going to be part of that roster in the playoffs are surely Austin Hedges, Emmanuel Clase. The Astros, the only former Ranger to pitch or play a game for the Astros this year is Alex Speas, former Ranger, made his debut last year. Great heartwarming story of a guy who did not play in minor league baseball, went and coached high school ball, then came back for the Rangers, just shot up the system, had a couple of good outings for the Rangers last year, but was eventually DFA'd, sent to the White Sox, and then somehow made his way to Houston, pitching a couple games for them. In terms of the Orioles, which is the most surprising thing in all of this research, the Orioles only have one former Ranger on their roster all year. Just one, which is very un-Orioles-like in their trends of just always having at least 5 to 7 former Rangers on their roster. But alas, this year, only Dylan Tate was a member of the Orioles this year. I do not believe he will be a part of their postseason plans. Did not pitch particularly well for them, but the Royals, this is a team with a lot of former Rangers on there, including a lot of former Rangers reigning World Series champions, including Robbie Grossman, Cole Reagans, Will Smith, and Chris Stratton, though both of those guys are on the IL. Jordan Lyles pitched a couple of games this year, which is shocking to say for a team that was so freaking good this year. And they also, of course, have Michael Lorenzen, who the Rangers traded them at the deadline because the Rangers had so much starting pitching that they could afford to give some up. And Lorenzen has been fantastic with Kansas City, mainly in a starting role. I believe he's come out of the bullpen for one game. I don't know if he's going to be part of their postseason rotation, but he is going to be a big part of their team. And obviously, their star, Bobby Witt Jr., a local boy. His father pitched for the Rangers, and he grew up in Colleyville, a DFW kid. So if you're rooting for local kids, the Royals might just be the team that you're putting all of your rooting interests in. And then the Tigers, the last team in the postseason, though technically not the last team to clinch because, as I mentioned, a couple of games today. But the last team that I thought was going to be in the postseason has a few former Rangers. Andy Ibanez is the only one who I believe will be playing any kind of role of significance in the postseason. He has hit lefties very well. And before the Rangers, cut ties with him, he turned out to be a half-decent, pretty good at times, defensive second baseman and third baseman, but just could not find a spot on the Rangers roster. I did not really believe in him that much as a hitter, but as a guy who hits lefties, he's going to face 1 to 2 lefty starting pitchers that the Astros have going out there in Game 1 in Framber Valdez, in Game 3 if they get there, Yusei Kikuchi. So he's going to play an important role. They also have former Ranger great Shelby Miller, Mason Englert, and yes, indeed, former Ranger farmhand Ricky Vanasco. That is all the former Rangers that are in the playoffs. Coming up, we're going to look at my personal vendetta rankings, which teams I would least like to watch succeed, and then some playoff picks for how these series are going to turn out. Right after this word from our sponsors. This show is brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the best way to get real money on sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, PrizePicks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Run your season all game long on PrizePicks. You now can win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. PrizePicks invented the flex play, which means you can still cash out if your lineup isn't perfect. You can double your money even if one of your picks doesn't hit. So download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB to get $50 instantly after you place your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks. Run your game. Shout out to the everydayers making Locked On Rangers your first listen every single day. On tomorrow's show, I'll be back and looking at what the Rangers minor league season looked like, some highs, some lows, and some things to look forward to next season on the farm. Now, let's get into my personal vendetta rankings for the most rootable against teams. Because at this point, when the Rangers aren't in it, it's mainly about what do I not want to happen? Well, at least when there are so many teams that are just so immensely dislikable, at least for Rangers fans. I think I'm not alone in this when I say the number one thing that I am rooting for or against in this postseason is that stupid Astros ALCS streak. I'm so tired of hearing about it. Honestly, I'm so tired of hearing about it. And watching the Detroit Tigers come in there to Houston and take 2 out of 3 and knock them out in the first round would be my most favorite thing to watch. Obviously, Astros fans are just the bane of Rangers fans' existence. They have been, unfortunately, very good for such a long time that watching them sneak into the playoffs this year with a mediocre team in terms of how the Astros have been the last 7-8 years. This is probably the worst Astros team to get into the playoffs, or just to exist, since that streak started. Shame on you, Seattle Mariners, for blowing just the most wide open division lead that seemed so ripe for the taking. In terms of other Rangers villains, I mean, teams that the Rangers beat last year, I know I'm just said that I'm rooting for the Astros to lose, but in terms of teams succeeding this year and being able to, somehow piggybacking it into Rangers' success of, this team was only able to, make it all that far because they didn't have to play the Rangers. The Orioles are definitely up there of teams of like, if you want the Rangers to look good, the Orioles turning it on this year and going on a deep run, that would generally bode well for the Rangers. Same for if the Diamondbacks were able to get into the postseason and go on another long run of saying, look how good the Rangers must have been last year to beat the Diamondbacks. The same with the Orioles. And unfortunately, the Rays aren't in the playoffs this year for the Rangers to make that point. But alas, that's what it is. Also, New York Yankees are in the playoffs. Easy team to root against. So easy to root against, honestly, for pretty much everybody who's not a Yankees fan. It is just a surefire, very easy way to say, okay, I don't like that team. I don't want them to succeed. And also getting to hold that over my friend Stacey Gotsulias' head that the Rangers have won a World Series more recently than the Yankees. I really enjoyed doing that this year and enjoyed doing that for all Yankees fans that exist and how obnoxious they can be. I'd like to be able to keep doing that for at least one more year, if not for many, many, many years to come. In terms of the teams in the National League, there's not many that do much for me in terms of a fan base that I particularly don't like. There's not really many Rangers villains of players who have had amazing games against the Rangers or done things to wrong the Rangers outside of one particular player on the New York Mets. No, I'm not talking about Luis Angel Acuna. I hope that guy is amazing. I hope he has a fantastic career. I hope he has all the success in the world. Great kid, rooting for nothing but the best from him. But one particular reliever who happens to be now on the New York Mets, who was starting the season on the Rays, Phil Maton, who might have thrown the most consequential, who did throw the most consequential pitch of the season in terms of the Rangers. A 90-mile-an-hour four-seam fastball that tailed in on Josh Young, trying to check his swing, couldn't check his swing, ends up getting hit right in the wrist and breaking it, causing him to miss the vast majority of this season. I'm not saying that it was on purpose for Phil Maton, but I do wish bad baseball things on him this year. When I saw him gave up a couple runs in that game 161 of that doubleheader today, feeling pretty good about it. Unfortunately, the Braves were not able to tag him with the loss, which would have felt very, very good for me personally in my rooting against Phil Maton. But in terms of, just genuinely dislikable teams, obviously the Dodgers are up there as being villainous. I don't have any ill will against Shohei Ohtani. I like watching him play. I'm glad we're going to get to see him for at least 3 games in the postseason for the first time in his MLB career. That is going to be fun to watch. But in terms of the NL side, not a whole lot to root against particularly. A lot of likable teams, likable young teams in this wild card round. Basically every team that is in this wild card round outside of course, Houston is a team that I could find a way to root for. But in terms of just things that I'm rooting for, teams that I am rooting for, the Kansas City Royals are definitely up there because of how many former Rangers they have on there. Really love Cole Reagans. Love watching Bobby Witt Jr. Play. He's just such a fun player. Lots of former Rangers on there. On the NL side of the bracket, I mean, my heart is always with San Diego. My brother lives in San Diego. I've been to several Padres games. They've all been so much freaking fun. Jurickson Profar is an absolute delight. Him having the best season of his career this year has been so much fun after the passing of Peter Seidler, who I think has been the best owner in Major League Baseball for a decade, for the longest time. He has been an incredible owner, an incredible, visionary of what you would want an owner to be in the sport, spending lots of money on his team, caring about the city, about the environment, about how much it means, how important it is to own a Major League Baseball team, and just rooting for other teams that genuinely spend money and force other cheap owners to look bad. That's what the Rangers' strategy was that won the World Series, was spending money on good free agent players. That was the main thing that got him there. A couple of smart trades here and there that built rosters on the fringes, but without Corey Seager and without Marcus Semien, and heck, even without the bits and pieces on the side of free agency of Nathan Eovaldi and also Jacob deGrom, didn't play as much of a role as Marcus Semien and Corey Seager, but without those big spending for sprees in free agency, which is good for the game, good for baseball, and needs to be encouraged more, as opposed to just moneyballing it and everyone loving spending zero money on your team. I think that poor owners need to be shamed more often. Front offices that don't spend money, ownership groups that don't invest in their teams. I think that needs to be rooted against those teams, the money balls of the world. I think it's better when teams spend money, even though the New York Yankees have been the kings of that for, 30 years or so. Still, it's good for the sport when teams are spending their free agent dollars on the big signings and when those guys work out. It is a good thing for the sport. It is something that the Padres did very, very aggressively. It's something that the Mets have done very, very aggressively. The Phillies as well. The Yankees as well, though not as much as in years past, and the Dodgers too. It's a lot of teams that have been spending very, very aggressively. It's a strategy that the Rangers have employed, and I hope that they employ in the future. Not just saying, okay, we got our big free agents, we got our World Series, we're not going to spend. I don't think that's going to be a long-term thing. I'm hoping that with this TV money, RSN that is owned by the Rangers, that they are working on creating this offseason, I'm hoping that kind of leans and makes this team, more financially flexible, aka willing to spend big dollars on good big free agents in years to come. But that's kind of where my rooting interests lie in terms of just pure rooting for in this postseason. San Diego's my number one. Kansas City's my number two. Actually, reverse that. Anybody who's playing against the Astros, number one. San Diego, my number two. Kansas City, my number three. And other than that, I'm just rooting for a lot of good baseball. Coming up, we're going to make some postseason predictions, what it's going to look like in these series, and what could be the thing that turns the tide to give a team the chance to unseat the Rangers as the reigning World Series champs. Right after this word from our sponsors. This show is brought to you by FanDuel. Hey NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. It's also, obviously, postseason time. Let's look at the World Series odds right now. The favorites are the Los Angeles Dodgers at plus 350, Phillies plus 380, Yankees, Padres, then Astros. Good to see the Padres ahead, actually tied with those Houston Astros. The worst odds for anyone in the postseason right now to win the World Series. Kansas City Royals and Detroit Tigers at plus 3,000, somehow behind the Braves and Mets, who are at plus 2,300 and are having to play 2 games the day before they fly off to a different city for a best of 3 wildcard series. Don't really know about that, but I'm really excited to watch all of this postseason action. So head over to FanDuel.com and download America's #1 sportsbook. This show is brought to you by Gametime. Gametime is the best way to get tickets to all the live events you want to go to. Whether it's sports, whether it's comedy, music, theater, no matter what it is, Gametime is the best way to get your tickets. Just a couple weeks ago, I got tickets to a day game for the Rangers to go watch Kamar Rocker out there. The best seats that I've ever had at Globe Life Field, and getting tickets was so easy. Gametime Picks has a new feature called Gametime. Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks, which filters out all the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. They've also got all-in pricing, and toggling this feature shows you the total upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. You can also get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy, so you know exactly what it's going to look like before you even get there. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB to get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? It's game time. Shout out to the Everydayers for making Locked On Rangers your first listen every single day. On Thursday, shall we be back and looking at a few things that went wrong in the worst ways for the Rangers to make sure that they did not have a chance to defend their title as World Series champs. Now let's go into the predictions, starting with the first series of the day. It's the Tigers versus the Houston Astros. It's going to be Tarek Skubal, I think I've been saying that wrong all year long, versus the Houston Astros. And the Tigers have a frisky bunch. They've been playing fantastic baseball as of late. Their offense has been, Riley Green has been phenomenal. Kerry Carpenter against righties has been absolutely phenomenal. I mean, he's a top 5 hitter in baseball against right-handed pitching. But unfortunately for the Tigers, the Houston Astros have 2 different left-handed starting pitchers that they're going to be deploying in this series. The bullpen for the Tigers has been fantastic. It has been really mixed and matched of really they're only going to have really one true starter in this one. Granted, it is the guy who has been the best pitcher in all of baseball this year, in Skubal, but the depth of their lineup, I don't know that I believe in it. The Houston Astros have, been there, done that. Unfortunately, time and time again, it's going to be really difficult for Detroit to unseat Houston, but the chance they have there is because Yordan Alvarez is questionable for this series. We have no idea what he's going to look like in this series. If he is going to play, I have to imagine that he is going to play in this one. But this is a more beatable Houston team than we've seen in a long, long time. Detroit, I know I talked up their bullpen being great, but the depth of it, I mean, they have so many guys that can go and get you to 3 innings. They also just called up their top prospect, Jackson Jobe, who is the best pitching prospect in all of baseball. Throws 100 with a wicked slider and a half-decent changeup. Could be a big, big factor for them in this one. And also, Game 1 starter, Tariq Skubal, in a 3-game series where if Skubal goes out there and dominates the Astros, which he can dominate any lineup in baseball. He's been unbelievably good this year. And if the Tigers can just find a way to get to Houston, I think that there's a chance. But honestly, I'm picking the Tigers. I don't feel good about it in this first series. Kansas City versus Baltimore. Right now, Kansas City's offense has been just dead for a month. We'll see what Vinny Pasquantino looks like if he gets back into the series. Basically, their second or probably third best hitter all season long. Obviously, Bobby Witt Jr. has been amazing. Cole Reagans has been amazing. The whole pitching staff for Kansas City has been excellent. Baltimore's offense has regained some life after looking kind of lifeless in the second half of this season. Baltimore very easily could have won the AL East had they not tailed off quite a bit in the second half. Still a very good team. Still have they have 3 whole games of postseason on that roster. A couple guys have some more postseason experience than that. But even though it's hard to pick against 3-time World Series champ in a row, Will Smith's team, going deep in October, I think I'm going to pick the Baltimore Orioles in that series. Let's just stay in the AL. Houston versus Cleveland. I am going with the Guardians. Actually, I think I just said I picked the Tigers. Let's go with that. I'm still picking the Guardians over the Tigers. It would be a fun, upset in that first round. I don't know if I truly believe it, but picking the Houston Astros on my own podcast just feels like a no-no. No matter how wrong I am, I'm just never going to pick the Houston Astros because I am a hater through and through, and I want to be true to myself and who I am. So we have Detroit versus Cleveland. I'm picking Cleveland in that one. I think that Cleveland's pitching is just that much better. The offense, I believe in it, even though it's a little bit streakier than Detroit. They have, a more legit bat in the middle of their lineup in Jose Ramirez, who is just absolutely phenomenal, had a phenomenal season, had a chance for a 40-40 season, had that final game of the year not been rained out. He was 1 home run shy. Also would have had 40 doubles. He was 1 shy of 40 doubles as well. Really good season for Ramirez. The rest of their lineup is fine. Josh Naylor is a very, very good hitter, but outside of that, the rest of their offense is very, very streaky. Starting pitching is not as good as it's been in years past, but their bullpen is by far the best in baseball, and they have 3 to 5 guys that I would feel good as if that was your best option, your closer option. That's how good and deep Cleveland's bullpen has been. Yankees versus Orioles. I'm picking the Orioles because I think that their team is a little better constructed for the playoffs. Now, New York's pitching staff is better, but the bullpen atrocity that the Yankees have been trotting out there, it's not trustworthy. Now, Baltimore's bullpen is not particularly trustworthy either, but I like Corbin Burns out there in the best of 3 series. We'll see him probably once. I don't think they're going to be able to throw him in game 1 of that wild card series and then turn around and throw him for multiple games in the ALDS. I like the depth of the Orioles offense better than the Yankees. Obviously, the Yankees have 2 of the best hitters on the planet in Aaron Judge and Juan Soto. But outside of those guys, I don't know how much I trust the rest of their offense. I mean, we've seen some good stretches from guys up and down this lineup. We've seen good stretches from, random guys like Jazz Chisholm, who they traded for, who has been pretty darn good. I just don't trust guys 6 through 9 in the lineup of the Yankees like I do the Baltimore Orioles. So I would go with the edge going to Baltimore. A Cleveland versus Baltimore ALCS, not exactly star-studded, but I think we get some very, very good baseball there. I am going to go with Baltimore. I think their offense is just that so much better than Cleveland's. Their pitching staff it's not great. I still don't get why the Orioles haven't made more aggressive trades, especially this year when Corbin Burns is is under contract for 1 year. He's going to be a free agent. You don't know if you're going to get him back. I don't know why they weren't more aggressive at the trade deadline to get at least one more starting pitcher, to get at least 1 or 2 more arms in the bullpen. It's going to be a close series, but I think that goes to 7, and the Baltimore Orioles are the kings of the AL this year. Now let's run through the National League real quick. Braves versus Padres. I feel like these first 2 series are going to be really easy because the Braves just had to play 2 games a day before flying all the way across the country to San Diego. I think the Padres win it in 2. I think the Brewers win it in 2 against the Mets. Fun story for them to get there. But I think it's too much having to play this much baseball in that short a time and travel all that much. So I'm picking the Brewers and the Padres there. Padres versus Dodgers. I'm going with my heart and I'm picking the Padres. The Dodgers I don't think they have enough starting pitching depth, and I don't think they have enough. They might have enough offense just to make up for it, but when we saw last year what their starting pitching looked like in the postseason, I think it's a little bit better this year. But I don't trust the health of the guys that are there or the quality of the guys who I know are healthy for the Dodgers. I just think that the Padres are in a much, much better spot. And I know that the Dodgers just took 2 out of 3 last week against San Diego. I don't know why. I've got a good feeling about the Padres in that series. Brewers versus Phillies. I think the Phillies are going to wallop whoever comes out of that series, whether it's the Mets or the Brewers. But I'm picking the Phillies to make it back to the NLCS for what I believe will be the 3rd or 4th straight year they've done that. And then the NLCS will be Phillies versus Padres. It's a tough series to predict. I mean, I really, really like the starting pitching that Philadelphia and San Diego has. I mean, the Padres have 3-4 starters that I feel pretty darn good with. There's not a whole lot of teams that I could say the same in this postseason picture. I mean, having 4 starters that you feel at least half decent about, I think that there's 3 teams in this whole postseason that I could say, yeah, a Game 4 starter would be fine. Whoever they have as a Game 4 starter is fine. I think that's Kansas City. I think that's the Padres, and I think that's the Phillies. Even the Phillies, I'm kind of waffling back and forth on that. But the depth of this Padres offense, just the good vibes that they have going, I feel like Phillies vibes have been mediocre at times this year. They've been amazing. They've also been just truly terrible. I mean, the Phillies had a month-long stretch where they were one of the worst teams in baseball. I don't know if they're going to be able to handle the Padres. I think that is going to be a dynamite NLCS if that's the one that we get. I think no matter what we get out of the NL, I think it's going to be a lot of great postseason baseball. But I'm picking the Padres. We have Padres versus Orioles in the World Series. I'm going with my heart again. Padres in 6, first-time champions, back-to-back years. Rangers won their franchise's first World Series last year, as we all know and appreciate. Padres have never won a World Series. They have been there back with Bruce Bochy in the 90s. I believe that was 1998 when they ended up losing to the Yankees. Padres versus Orioles would be a fantastic World Series, no matter what's happening in this World Series, as long as the team that I hate the most loses as quickly and painfully and expeditiously as possible. I am very stoked for whatever is going to happen in these playoffs. But that's going to do it for today's show. Thank y'all so much for listening and subscribing, and until next time, don't forget to enjoy World Series champion Texas Rangers baseball.